Hi guys, it's Kathy. Fake Kathy. Not really Kathy. I'm not really here. I'm fast asleep. Because I just opened and closed 2 days in a row, and I just got off work just a couple hours ago, and I just finished doing the live stream, and now I won't be able to stay awake to do a live. Wait, I'm sorry, I lost track of what I was saying. I lost track of everything. This sucks. I need to focus. I'm gonna drink some caffeine real quick. I just worked, and then I did my live stream, and I'm at the very end of my rope right now. But we cannot go 3 days in a row without OJ. We just can't. So I'm doing this premiere thingy where you guys can still talk to each other. I'm gonna be here with you for the whole thing, but you can't talk to me because I'm in the past and you're in the future. No, I don't want to stop recording. What the hell? I just started. Yo. So I don't know if I'm gonna make it 2 hours, but we are gonna have some OJ today. Yes, sir. Here we go.
Back on the record in the Simpson matter, Mr. Simpson is again present before the court with his counsel, Mr. Shapiro, Mr. Cochran, Mr. Blazier, Mr. Scheck, Mr. Neufeld, people represented by Mr. Harmon, and Ms. Clark. Jury is not present. We previously had scheduled a hearing with the Los Angeles City Attorney regarding certain records held by the Los Angeles Police Department Internal Affairs Division, and I've conferred with counsel in chambers, and we have agreed to complete the testimony of Professor Terrence Speed before we proceed to that argument to allow Mr. Ullman to join us for the purposes of that argument. Is that correct, Mr. Cochran?
Yes, sir.
All right. Ms. Clark? All right. Anything else before we resume with Dr. Speed?
Yes, very briefly. Mr. Gelberg will be down to address the court on concerning the matter of the further discovery. Dr. Baden and Wolf were both here during the testimony of Dr. Lakshmanan and took copious notes that we observed. In the package of discovery that was just delivered to us last night, there was nothing like that. And so we are asking for the court to require that those notes be turned over to us.
All right. Well, we'll take that up when Mr. Kelberg joins us.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you. Well, we'll get to that when we get to that. All right. Deputy McNair, let's have the jurors, please.
Come on, Ito. We ain't got time for this.
Yeah, the record should reflect that we've been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And Professor Speed, would you resume the witness stand, please? All right, let the record reflect that Professor Terrence Speed is again on the witness stand now to undergo cross-examination by Mr. Harmon. And Professor Speed, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Sir, you were reminded that you were still under oath, and Mr. Harmon, you may commence with your cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Professor Speed, it's true, is it not, that you have never written an article relying on any aspect of the NRC report?
That is true.
It's true, is it not, that you have never given any lecture relying on any aspect of the NRC report?
Not a very public lecture. I've given talks at UC Berkeley on this topic, in which I've made references to the report.
Okay. Professor, I have asked you whether or not you have given a lecture which relied on any aspect of the NRC report. Have you?
Yes.
And you have relied on it?
I'm sorry, if relied in the sense of quoting it and using it as my source of information? Yes.
And basing your opinion on it?
Yes.
Will you describe the relationship of the National Research Council to the National Academy of Sciences?
Well, as I understand it, the National Research Council is a separate body funded by the United States government to produce reports and I think hold symposia, and it has some affiliation to the National Academy of Sciences, but it is formally a separate organisation. I think the National Academy of Sciences plays a fairly important role in the selection of topics and the management of the NRC, but yeah, as I say, I think they're separate bodies. That's my understanding.
And the National Academy of Sciences in this country represents the elite in various fields of science. Is that true?
That is certainly true.
And the National Research Council, the body that you mentioned, do those members also represent the elite in specific areas?
Well, certainly, yeah.
Would you agree that the members of the committee that produced the report that you've quoted, DNA Technology and Forensic Science, that those members are elite?
I would agree with that.
Would you agree that they're eminent?
Well, these words have different meanings to different people, but I think it's reasonable to say that each of them is eminent in their own field, but I'm not really in a position to judge everybody because they're not all in my field. But I think it's a reasonable understanding that that would be the case.
That they're eminent?
Yeah.
Okay. And Victor McCusick, the chairman of the Committee on DNA Technology and Forensic Science, do you know who he is?
I certainly know of him, and there's no doubt he is eminent.
Quite eminent.
Quite eminent.
What other members of the committee are you personally or professionally familiar with?
Well, I certainly know Professor Mary Claire King, who up until very recently was a member of my own university. Professor David Kay from the University of Arizona. May I look at the list?
Are you mistaken that David Kay is on the first NRC committee?
Perhaps I am.
Sure. Those are the ones that you can recall right now?
I have a suspicion there's more. Certainly
Okay.
Eric Lander, Professor Eric Lander of the Whitehead Institute. I know him pretty well. And,
George Sensabaugh?
of course, yeah.
Your
George
university?
Sensabaugh, colleague at the University of California, Berkeley. I know him well.
Okay, why don't you
May I?
look at the list and tell us which other members you know well?
I have met Mr. Henry Lee. Know well would not be a correct description. I've met Dr. Thomas Marr on numerous occasions and know well in a professional sense. And that would be about it. I've certainly read writings by a number of the other authors, but I think I've mentioned all of the people that I have personal acquaintance with.
Now, of the people that you have, the members with which you are personally and professionally acquainted, you consider them to be eminent, do
Yes.
you not?
Yes.
No shortcomings in their field?
Everybody has shortcomings. I mean, eminent is kind of a blanket word. It doesn't mean somebody's perfect. So eminent is just something that people have, a description that people have when they're senior and experienced. So I don't think it'd be fair to say it implies they have no shortcomings.
Did you yourself make any contributions to the first report by the Committee on DNA Technology?
No, I did not.
None whatsoever?
No,
And you first became aware of these issues, I believe you mentioned, at a meeting at USC in 1990?
that's correct.
You recall me being there, too?
I don't actually. I'm sorry.
Have you yourself made any contributions to the new committee that is in progress of writing a report?
I have.
What have the nature of those contributions been?
I contributed to a letter by Professor Joel Cohen from the Rockefeller University which addressed the issue of proficiency testing to estimate error rates.
Would you agree that the report is considered on some level as a consensus report from the respective members?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Now, Professor, would you agree that, or do you feel that, and this is talking about this report, that it amazed you how its assumptions escaped the notice of all the eminent people on the NRC panel, and then in parentheses, sarcasm intended?
That does sound like a quotation from something I've written.
And you feel that way?
On the specific issue that I was speaking of, yes.
So you don't feel that those people were eminent in certain aspects of their report?
Well, I've already said that I don't regard eminent as implying infallibility. Eminent people can make mistakes.
Who chose the quotations that Mr. Neufeld flashed up here for the jury yesterday?
Well, he had some of them, but in fact every single one of them I have indicated in my copy already as things that I agree with very strongly and would like to see come about.
When you say he, you mean Mr. Neufeld?
Yes, I'm sorry. Mr. Neufeld was aware of some of them, not all of them, but they're all ones that I had, in advance of discussing the matter with him, singled out as important.
Okay. Now, the quote that I just read to you, and I'll give you a chance to show it to you. I want to show it to counsel first. This quote is actually from a letter you wrote to Professor Weir, isn't it?
You want me to reapproach for a second, please?
Yes, with the court, please.
Didn't I fast forward right? I really dislike fast forwarding, but you all know that. It's just another moment. Fine, I'll try to fix it. I can't. There. There.
All right, thank you, counsel. Proceed.
Professor Speed, yesterday, a series of quotes from the NRC report that I just asked you about were flashed up on the screen, and you were asked whether or not you agreed with them. Do you recall that?
I do.
And approximately half of those comments were from Chapter 3 of the report, DNA Technology and Forensic Science, were they not?
Well, if you'd like me
Would
to
you like to check that?
I will.
Okay. Starts on page 74 through 96.
Yep. That seems about right. Yep.
Okay. And Chapter 3 was the source or the area that you made your comment in the letter to Bruce Weir that's dated September 29th, 1992, was it not?
That is correct.
Okay. And the areas from which quotes were elicited yesterday had to do with laboratory error rate. Isn't that true?
That is true.
Now, when you wrote this letter to Professor Weir in September of 1992, when you said, "It amazed me how its assumptions escaped the notice of all the eminent people on the NRC panel," parentheses, sarcasm intended, end parentheses, you were criticizing the people, whoever they were, that produced part of Chapter 3, were you not?
Objection. I just have to have a chance to look at the letter before you answer the question.
Yes.
Would you like to look at the letter again, Exhibit 577?
It's been pointed out to him once already.
May I point out that the assumptions I'm talking about refer to the so-called ceiling principle.
And the eminent people you were talking about with sarcasm intended were the eminent people who wrote Chapter 3, weren't they?
Yes.
Who were they?
We've just discussed the names of the people I know. Do you want me to go through the list of names again?
Did you ever discuss Chapter 3 with Mary Claire King?
No, I did not.
Did you ever discuss it with Eric Lander?
No.
Now, Professor Weir, the first case that you became involved in,
Speed.
I'm sorry, Professor Speed, the first case that you became involved in was a capital case in San Francisco, People versus Briggs. Isn't that true?
That is true.
And what year did you first become involved in that case?
I believe it was 1992.
That was a capital case, wasn't it?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And you have some extreme views about the capital or death penalty in the United States, don't you?
Sustained.
May we approach on that, Your Honor?
No.
What was the other case you became involved in? You mentioned two cases yesterday.
It was a case with Contra Costa County, and I believe the defendant's name was Robert Taylor.
Okay. Did you ever testify in that case?
No.
Your CV lists 120 articles and chapters, does it not?
Yes, it does.
None deal directly with the application of statistics in forensic settings, do they?
That is correct.
Do you have a copy of your CV in front of you?
I do.
I'd like you to refer to the item that's numbered 111 on your CV, if you would.
Yes.
Okay, and would you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what the role of statistics plays in that article?
I was assisting in the analysis of data that had been collected for a study on AIDS. So statistics was involved in analysis of the data.
In what way?
Well, there was a group of male homosexuals, some of whom were HIV positive at one time and not at a previous time, some of whom were HIV negative throughout the entire period, and there was this group of male homosexuals were cross-classified according to various sexual practices that they had admitted indulging in or that had taken place or they had been involved in over the period.
Wait,
that would have
what?
related to when they might have gone from being HIV negative to HIV positive, if that was that group, or when they remained HIV negative throughout the entire period.
And he
if that
got
was the other
paid for this study?
And in what way does your contribution to that article demonstrate any connection between HIV and AIDS?
Sustained.
It's true, is it not, that of the 120 articles and chapters, you have never expressed any concerns that you seem to have expressed yesterday about the role of forensic DNA typing in the legal system? Isn't that true?
I have not written any papers in this list about that topic. That is true.
About what you talked about yesterday?
That is correct. In papers. As I said earlier, I expressed these views in a letter for the second NRC report on this same topic.
You mentioned that you have previously served on editorial boards, have you not?
That is correct.
Would you briefly describe the role of an editor and the responsibilities that are attendant to that role?
Well, I've mainly been an associate editor, not the top editor. So the associate editor's role is usually to look at papers as they come in, as they're submitted for publication, and choose referees, people who will review the papers, get the reports from the referees, synthesize them into an overall report on the paper, which is then transmitted to the editor with a recommendation for the treatment of that paper.
And do you take that role very seriously?
Of course.
Why is that?
Well, it's one of my professional responsibilities.
And what would happen if something fell through the cracks, a published article fell through the cracks without your careful review?
I don't understand what you mean by fall through the cracks.
If you hadn't carefully reviewed something and then an article emerged in the peer review literature with your name on it as an editor.
Well, usually articles don't appear in the literature that I'm associated with my name on as an editor, but I'm afraid I still don't understand what you mean.
Okay. If you were not careful in your review of an article and the article were published, what are the consequences or the implications of an article with faulty scientific data in it appearing in the peer review literature?
Definitely
Well,
sanctions.
usually if an article appears in the peer review literature, it is regarded as the responsibility of the author. The editors may be unhappy that they let it slip through, but ultimately authors are responsible for their publications. And if there are errors, that responsibility goes home to the person that made those errors, though it may cast some doubt on the quality of the reviewing process.
When were you first contacted to be associated with the defense in this case?
September 1994.
And when did you first meet with any defense counsel in this case?
I think a month or two after that, they visited Berkeley and we talked.
Who did you meet with?
Mr. Scheck and Mr. Neufeld made the initial visit to Berkeley to talk with me.
And did you make any notes of that event?
No.
And when was the next time that you met with the defense in this case?
I think about April this year, either I was briefly in Los Angeles or, and they, not Mr. Scheck on this occasion, Mr. Neufeld came to Berkeley. Those two communications occurred rather close together. One of them was when I was here and the other was when Mr. Scheck and, Mr. Neufeld and Mr. Thompson came to Berkeley.
Did you do any work whatsoever between September and April on this case?
I did lots of work, yeah. Work in the sense of reading and thinking and so on.
Okay, and are those things that you would have done regardless of this case?
This case has given me an opportunity to get much more deeply into the issues than I might have otherwise. There's no doubt about that. So I couldn't say that I would have done it had the case not been around, no.
Now, you wrote no report. Is that true?
That is correct.
You made no notes of any of the sessions that you had with defense counsel in this case. Is that true?
I have written things. They're not notes of sessions and they're not reports, but I have written brief memos way back before Christmas.
And what do those memos consist of?
Well, they were being prepared. At the time, I thought I was being involved in a Kelly Fry hearing, and I prepared a rather small number of notes on what I considered important issues, the usual sort of thing, the product rule, that just two or three of the contentious areas which I think, well, you would be familiar with. If you'd like me to enumerate them, I'll try to remember.
That's okay. Now, you knew before you testified yesterday that I would be cross-examining you. Is that true?
Not really, no.
Did you receive a letter from me?
You mean in the last 2 weeks?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Did you receive 2 letters from me?
I did.
And the first letter, I asked for an opportunity to meet with you about your views. Isn't that true?
That is true.
And I had advised you that I had no idea what you were going to testify about. Isn't that true?
That is true.
And I wanted an opportunity to sit down and talk with you ahead of time. Isn't that true?
That's what you said in your fax.
And did you believe that?
Oh, I believed it.
That I wanted to find out what you had to say?
Yes,
Okay. And you were in town during that week, in this town?
I was
Isn't
in
that
this
true?
town.
And you faxed me a cordial response declining the opportunity to talk to me. Isn't that true?
That is true.
And then I faxed you a second letter. Isn't that true?
That is true.
And describe the nature of your relationship with Professor Weir.
Well, he's obviously a professional colleague who works in the area of statistics and genetics, and that is not a very large field. So we cross paths, not terribly often, but from time to time. I regard him as a friend as well. I've visited him and stayed in his home in North Carolina.
So he's a personal friend?
Yeah, I wouldn't say a close personal friend, but definitely a personal friend.
Professionally, you respect him?
Certainly.
You disagree with him sometimes?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, in the second letter, I proposed that you discuss whatever you would testify about with Professor Weir, didn't I?
You did.
And you never responded to that letter or acknowledged that letter. Isn't that true?
No, that's not true.
You did?
I did.
You responded to it.
I responded.
And where did that response go to?
It was faxed to the number you get when you ring the address that you had on your letter, and I brought a copy of the acknowledgement that the fax was sent to that place.
And what did you say in your response?
Could I perhaps look at a copy to remind me?
I never got it, so I
No,
can't.
but I do have copies here.
Sure.
Would it be possible for me to ask Mr. Neufeld to give me a copy?
Approach each person.
Shall I read my reply?
Sure.
It went to the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, Bureau of Central Operations, Special Trials. That's the fax number I got when I phoned, because the previous fax number didn't work for some reason. Dear Mr. Harmon, thank you for your fax dated July 27th, 1995, requesting that I discuss my anticipated testimony with Dr. Bruce Weir. With respect, I decline. Yours sincerely, Terry Speed.
Now, knowing that you're a personal friend of Dr. Weir and knowing you have professional respect for him, why did you decline to talk to him so that we might know what you would testify about in advance?
Well, the reason was that I would have felt very uncomfortable because I know that my testimony would have been disagreeing publicly with positions he's held publicly. For example, reading out a quote that you heard me attest to that I disagreed with, Dr. Weir, that sort of thing. Honestly, I don't feel very comfortable chatting on the phone with a professional colleague just before I'm about to go into this sort of situation and disagree with him. I would have thought that is not a very unusual human reaction.
Now, this is the man who invited your comments on his review article, Professor Weir,
Yes?
and you felt uncomfortable speaking to him 3,000 miles away on the phone.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you criticized yesterday Professor Weir's calculations for assuming that there was no error in the tests. Do you recall that?
I'm sorry, I criticized...
You criticized Professor Weir's population frequency calculations simply because they assumed that there was no error in the testing methods. Do you recall that yesterday?
may I clarify what I said?
Well, did you say that yesterday?
No, I did not say that.
What did you say yesterday?
I said that I thought the assumption is inappropriate in this context. I made no reference that I was aware of to the actual figures. I was criticizing the assumption because it seems to me an improper assumption to make in this context when there clearly is a possibility of lab error and other kinds of error. That anything predicated on the assumption there is not seems to me to be suspect.
Now, your views on the role of assumptions in statistics are far from mainstream, and you have found that many times with census adjustment reactor safety, haven't you?
Objection, irrelevant and argumentative.
Sustained. Rephrase the question.
Professor Speed, is it true that your views on the role of assumptions in statistics are far from mainstream?
Objection vague as to assumptions and statistics.
Overruled.
That is a correct statement that I put in my letter to Professor Weir, yes. I certainly feel that not enough attention is paid to the role of assumptions in doing statistical calculations and in particular evaluating probabilities such as associated with nuclear reactors, evaluating probabilities such as those associated with incorrectly concluding that a given individual is the source of a stain.
Well,
assumptions are critical in my view, and that's why I said that.
And you admit that your views on assumptions are not mainstream, right?
That is what I said in the letter.
Well, have they become mainstream since 1992?
In this particular context, I've become more convinced that I have broad support. I was prevented from mentioning names yesterday of many eminent statisticians
I
who
moved to
agree with
strike
me.
that, Your Honor. That's not
Yes,
responsive.
non-responsive. Ask the question.
Could you repeat the question, please?
I will ask a question, Professor. Let's go back to what Professor Weir did when he presented his population frequency calculations to this jury, okay? How else could the jury appreciate the significance of a genetic match if they decided that no error was in fact performed?
Well, in that case, Professor Weir's calculation would probably be the most relevant thing.
And the quote from page 88 of the National Research Council report prohibits combining the population frequency estimate and the laboratory error rate. Isn't that true?
That is true.
Now, assumptions do play a role in all sorts of statistical endeavors, don't they?
Of course, yes.
Let me give you an example. You know the kind of map, I think it's called the Mercator projection map, that takes the world as a globe and flattens it out? I think that's the right term for it.
Well, there are a number of such projections.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if I said to you, Professor Speed, assume the Earth was flat, as one of these maps represent, and I was in Chicago, and I could walk westbound directly, you could tell me how long it would take me to fall off the edge if I walked westbound at 5 miles an hour, couldn't you?
Well, I think if it was made a little more precisely, I probably could. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure I'm following.
Sure.
Exactly.
And the assumption that's wrong is the Earth isn't flat.
Yes, that's...
But if I forced you to make that assumption, you could do that sort of calculation, couldn't you?
I could, yes.
Can we see People's Exhibit 564, the testing, or could you get that 564? That's the note. Don't put it up here. Now, you have not spent any time reviewing the Los Angeles Police Department files on this case, have you?
I've spent a little time, but as you would know, that is outside my area of expertise, so I haven't made any attempt to master it completely.
But you were here for Dr. Gertie's testimony,
Yes?
okay, and you heard him discuss the possibilities that cross-contamination might have occurred in various places.
I did.
And were you here for the demonstration which showed on People's Exhibit 564, which demonstrated the history of samples 48, 50, and 52, the replicate testing
May I
demonstration?
consult my little crib sheet to see
Sure.
what those samples are?
Sure.
You can see if the witness is
No,
familiar.
counsel, he gets to conduct his examination the way he wants to.
These are Bundy walk drops, am I right? I wasn't actually here for that, but I am...
Now, you don't know whether any error actually occurred with the handling of those samples, do you?
I certainly don't, no.
If you knew, if you were able to trace the history of those samples, you would be able to try to troubleshoot the likelihood that those samples might have gotten cross-contaminated, wouldn't you?
Well, that wouldn't be my job. That would be a job for a microbiologist.
Well, you mentioned common mode failure yesterday. Do you recall that?
I did, yes.
Okay, in common mode failure, somebody traced the electrical system to find out that all three of these systems were wired through the same box.
They did that after the fire.
They did that after. Could you just define that common mode failure again, please?
Well, it's used in a context where two or more systems can be, in the reliability context, can fail as a result of some common cause, even though and it's usually used in a context where, beyond that common cause, they're actually operating independently, so that the only real common connection between them is this initial one.
It's a bottleneck they all go through.
Well, you could say that,
It's one way of describing it.
one way.
And do you know whether, have you evaluated the flow of samples in this case to determine whether there are bottlenecks or common modes in the handling of any of the samples?
Well, I've looked at it closely enough to see the possibility, but as I say, evaluating them in a professional sense is outside my area of expertise.
In a statistical sense?
Yes.
You could.
Well, when you know enough about a process to see that things which might initially be together then get split and have an independent existence or an independent processing thereafter, I mean, I've seen this situation often enough to know that the probabilities get reduced if there's consistency in the later analyses, but that the possibilities of some, in this case we're talking contamination occurring at the earlier stages before they were split, is an instance of this common mode that I've been talking about. So I've seen enough without being an expert to see the possibility.
What have you seen?
Well, information about some of the, if you like, life histories of some of these samples.
Well, tell us about 48, 50, and 52 then.
I'm afraid I don't have a detailed recollection of any of these. I've just seen enough to see the possibility
Well, what have you seen that's enough to describe the possibility of those samples suffering from common mode failure?
Well, simply listening to Dr. Gertie's testimony is enough to see the possibility of something happening at the beginning before things part ways. That's enough for me. I don't have to, at least from my point of view, to recognise this possibility. I don't have to read LAPD files or understand the testimony, as far as I'm concerned.
So let me get it clear what you heard of Dr. Gertie's testimony. You heard his direct examination. Is that true?
Some of it. Yeah.
Did he directly address whether common mode failure or anything analogous like that might have occurred with 48, 50, and 52, specifically?
I don't recall that, but he may have. I don't claim to have followed every detail of the testimony.
But whatever he said was enough for you to recognize the possibility. Is that
No,
what you...
I'm not making statements specific to items 49, 50, and 52. I was talking about processes in general, and I think I know enough about processes in general to see that there are initial phases where things might be together, and then later phases where they're being treated independently, and that the behaviour of errors and the overall probability of an inconsistency has to respect that sort of temporal and spatial flow. That's about the level at which I'm testifying, not in detail about particular drops or particular samples.
So that temporal and spatial flow that you've perceived through Dr. Gertie's testimony, that in fact does not relate to any specific item of evidence in this case, does it?
No, it's not. I'm not standing up here testifying to probabilities relating to items of evidence specifically. No.
Could we see 564?
You see that clearly, Doctor?
Would you- Sure. Just get familiar with that. Are you familiar enough with what's shown there?
Well, I can refer back to it if you ask me a
Sure.
question about it.
Sure. I want you to assume that all three of those samples, which you know are from the Bundy walkway, were typed by the three different laboratories in this case, the Los Angeles Police Department, the California Department of Justice DNA Lab, and Selmar, and that they all produced the same DQ alpha results. Okay?
Right?
And in your jargon, the common mode failure where these samples seem to have diverged would be on June 14th in the evidence processing room. Isn't that true?
That is true.
And if those samples were all produced the same type, that suggests that if there was common mode failure, it had to have happened on June 13th or June 14th.
I'm sorry, objection to the way it's the 13th and 13th or 14th, and ask me to rephrase the question.
Rephrase the question.
That if there was common mode failure, it would have had to have happened on June 14th when they were all together for the last time.
Objection, I think that is the evidence.
Hold on.
I'm not making statements with that degree of specificity. In particular, it would seem to me I would need to be a microbiologist or somebody very knowledgeable in this to say when errors occur. All I was speaking to was the possibility of errors in that initial phase before they were split being analogous to common cause errors, and if you wanted to get the overall probability of the final consistent results being erroneous results, then you would have to consider that step in the process.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm certainly not saying that that is the only way in which an error could have affected all of them. But it is a way, as I think should be clear from the flowchart.
Well, if no error was made on June 14th in the sampling in the evidence processing room or on June 13th in the evidence processing room, then there is no reason to believe that the results produced by those three labs are incorrect. Isn't that true?
I can't agree with that statement.
What reason do you have to believe that based on the chronology of those samples?
Again, I'm afraid I have to be general. You said there is no reason to believe. Nuclear reactors have done very bad things because people had no reason to believe that whatever malfunction actually happened might have happened. In other words, the fact that you have no reason to believe it doesn't actually mean it is true. I'm not here testifying that it is impossible or that it is necessary that errors may or may not happen in some places. We're talking about probabilities, about chances of errors occurring. And they exist, regardless of whether in any particular instance somebody may have no reason to believe they occurred. The chance of errors is something which is ever present in this sort of human activity.
You could walk out the street and get hit by a car crossing the street, couldn't you?
I believe that's a possibility.
Do you have a reason to believe that's going to happen?
Sustained.
What significance do you attribute to the fact that given the flow of those samples, each of the 3 labs produced the same result?
Well, that suggests, but again, this is an area of professional expertise beyond mine, because I speak to statistics and probability, whereas you're talking now about interpretation of results. But it would suggest that what went out was the same. I mean, an error calculation which only considered errors in the individual labs, and there was a consistent result, would suggest that they received the same thing. It would certainly tell you nothing about errors that might or might not have occurred before they were sent out.
Professor Speed, in fact, there are many other biological samples in this case that did not go through the June 13th and June 14th, let's call it common mode, aren't there?
Objection, Your Honor, the scope of your expertise.
Sustained.
Professor Speed, you don't know whether or not there are many other biological samples that did not have the same history of samples 48, 50, and 52 on June 13th and 14th, do you?
May I just say that I was here when this was presented.
Objection, it's non-responsive, Your Honor.
Sustained. Re-ask the question.
Professor Speed, you do not know whether or not there are many other biological samples that did not go through the evidence processing room on June 13th and June 14th, do you?
No, not in detail. No.
You know anything about samples 303, 304, and 305?
Spicy.
I know what they are. I don't have an immediate recollection of their processing history.
Okay. Well, let's show you People's Exhibit 565. And if you would.
Do you have a photo that's hard to read from the monitor? Do you have an additional photocopy for Professor Speed?
I think so.
Let me see if I can get you actually a hard copy of that.
Thanks.
He's definitely wishing that was rum.
Photocopied it.
I wonder if any of the other witnesses that testified, the scientists,
Photocopies of this.
warned him about how tedious this was going to be on his life. They're going to ask you the same questions over and over and over and over again.
Showing you a copy of Exhibit 565. Did you see that the other day with Dr. Gerdes?
Yes, I did.
Now, in fact, those samples, if the dates are correct, have a totally different history than samples 48, 50, and 52, do they not?
They certainly do.
And if they have a different history, then they share no common mode with 48, 50, and 52, do they?
With those samples, certainly, it would appear not. Yeah.
And would it be helpful in assessing whether common mode failure occurred in trying to track the history of specific samples in this case?
Yeah, I certainly believe so.
You didn't do that.
I wasn't doing any analyses, as you know, of the specific situations in this case. I was speaking in general.
Did you say yesterday that Professor Weir rejects the notion of error rate?
I believe I said yes to a quote from his testimony.
Excuse me?
I believe I said yes to a quote from his testimony which used that phrase.
Okay, and that is, in fact, part of the testimony that he presented, is it not?
That's my recollection.
And is this one of the reasons you didn't want to talk to him on the phone, because you didn't want to discuss this with him?
Well, as I,
Objection, Your Honor, argumentative.
Oh,
well, I really didn't want to enter into discussions about things on which I was about to testify, where I would be. I don't really have much to add to what I said before, except that I'm repeating myself. publicly disagreeing with his point of view makes me feel slightly uncomfortable. I would rather have done it
I'm
in
repeating
an
myself.
informal interchange
Yeah, you're going to
well
do
in advance
that
of this situation. And
a couple
suddenly,
more
a
times.
few days before I'm about to stand up and testify, it's not a situation I relished. And I took your statement that it wasn't necessary that I do this at its face value and declined.
Well, why didn't you do it months ago then?
Well, we have busy lives. I've been in Australia a bit. I had a very busy semester, and I don't know where Bruce has been other than here. But, we haven't been having regular informal exchange on these matters since the trial began. And, well, it doesn't seem to me too surprising, but perhaps we should have.
In retrospect, you think maybe you should have?
I'm really saying perhaps some other people feel we should have.
Okay. Now, in fact, if one were to... Did you call that out of his testimony yourself, or did somebody present that snippet of his testimony to you to comment on?
I had read the testimony, and obviously I was very interested in Bruce's views on something that I was testifying about. It wasn't my suggestion that we actually state it, though it was something that I preferred to do rather than have it done some other way.
And do you mean to imply that Professor Weir does not recognize the possibility of error?
I didn't mean to imply that.
Do you mean to imply that he rejects the notion that one might consider laboratory error rate?
It's my impression that Dr. Weir does not accord laboratory error rate the importance that I do, and that seemed a fairly clear statement of it. And I haven't actually seen him write anything that is fundamentally contradictory to that statement. So that seemed to be his view.
So you disagree with him on the significance that should be accorded to a laboratory error rate. Is that what you've just said?
Oh, very much so.
And not that there could be a laboratory error?
He has not said specifically that laboratory errors are impossible, yet he has, to my knowledge, never said they should play a role in the statistics of assessing the chance of incorrectly concluding somebody is the source of a DNA sample.
Okay, I'd like you to actually look at the broader, and I'd like to show you pages 33733 and 33734 of Professor Weir's testimony. Okay, could I have it back? Does that help refresh your recollection about the full passage that Professor Weir made those statements in?
Yes, but I certainly appreciate a copy if you want to question me more about it.
I wish I had a Xerox machine here, and I'd give you one.
Well, counsel, I'll tell you what.
Okay.
Well, let's take a recess. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our mid-morning recess. Please remember all my admonitions to you. Dr. Speed, you may step down. You're to return in 15 minutes. So not to take 15.
Recess. Time to trade
Doesn't matter,
piece
all
of
parties
Frank
are again
stickers.
present. Anything we need to take up before we conclude with Dr. Speed? All right, let's have the jury, please. All right, the record should be...
I am currently watching the live stream that's going on for you guys 2 hours ago. And Bill came early. Son of a gun. I'm so mad because I throw up "It's Bill" sign in about 7 minutes, I think. And he's already been in chat for like 7 minutes, I think. And I don't know if he's still going to be in chat in another 7 minutes to see the "It's Bill" sign. It's frustrating because there's nothing I can do about it. But I can continue with OJ.
Reflect that we've been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. Dr. Terrence Speed is again on the witness stand undergoing cross-examination by Mr. Harmon, and Mr. Harmon, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, may we mark the 2 pages of Professor Weir's testimony that I had shown to Professor Speed?
That would be
578? Yes, Your Honor.
578.
Professor Speed, I want to come back to where we left off.
7, 8.
I blocked out a couple of pertinent passage that you referred to yesterday. You had a chance to read that before the break?
Yes.
Now, isn't it true that Professor Weir, at the conclusion of the series of questions and answers, his final statement on the subject of laboratory error rate with regard to the frequency estimates that he presented was, I reject the notion that the laboratory error rate, should be incorporated.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
That's what it says.
And you understand from having read Professor Weir's testimony that the only statistics that he presented in his testimony were the population frequency estimates for the biological matches in this case.
That's correct.
Is that true? And you don't take issue with Professor Weir's statement that he rejects the notion that laboratory error rate and the population frequencies should be incorporated, do you?
Objection, that's not the testimony. And there's no
Overruled.
objection, since that's not evidence.
Overruled.
Could you restate the question, please?
Sure. Professor Weir, in the end of that series of questions and answers stated, did he not, I reject the notion that it should be incorporated.
Yes.
And from having read his testimony, you know that he was referring to was the laboratory error rate.
Yes.
Okay? And
It is a book by Stephen
or
King.
should not be incorporated
Duh.
was the population frequency estimate, which is the only estimate that he presented. That's what you understood that answer to mean, did you not?
Yes.
Yesterday, one of the slides that we saw was a quote from the National Research Council on page 88. Do you recall?
Yes.
And that quote was, coincidental identity, and laboratory error are different phenomena, so the two cannot and should not be combined in a single estimate. However, both should be considered. Do you recall that being up
I do indeed.
on the screen? You endorsed that statement yesterday from page 88 of the NRC report.
I still do.
And you agree with Professor Weir's statement that it should be incorporated. The laboratory error rate should be incorporated with the population frequency estimate. Isn't that true?
That is true.
And the reality is, Professor Weir didn't agree that you could quantify laboratory error rate. That's what he discussed in that segment, didn't he?
Objection, since it's not the testimony.
Overruled.
May I read the sentence that we're talking about? He says, you're asking me, in essence, to quantify something I don't think exists. So I reject the notion of an error rate.
I reject the notion that it should be incorporated.
Well, I'm sorry. He rejects the notion it should be incorporated, but the it that we're talking about, he has just previously said doesn't exist. That's what I thought I was, that's the quote that I was agreeing to yesterday. Incorporation of something that doesn't exist seems a moot point. He is stating very clearly here, as far as I read it, you are asking me, in essence, to quantify something I don't think exists. The something in question there is error rates. So I reject the notion of error rate. I don't see how that contradicts what I was saying yesterday. I didn't go on to comment on the quote that he rejects the notion that the it that he's just said doesn't exist should be incorporated. But I think he said very clearly that he doesn't think error rate exists. That's my reading of this document.
And you read his entire testimony.
I did, yes.
And he did not acknowledge that it is possible to make errors in DNA testing. Is that your testimony?
No, he doesn't.
I'm sorry.
Excuse me. That is the curious thing. He acknowledges that errors are possible, but here, as we have just read, he rejects the notion of an error rate. He says it doesn't exist, so it can't be quantified. To me, that is a very paradoxical point of view.
Well, you haven't made any attempts to quantify it yourself, independent of his statement, have you?
I have spoken, the answer is no to that, if I may elaborate.
Well, if it's
I've
an
spoken to the importance of...
objection that's non-responsive, you know.
Ask another question.
Yesterday, at the very close of your direct examination, Mr. Neufeld posed to you the dilemma when one has a coincidental match where the estimate is 1 in billions. Do you recall that? The very close of your testimony yesterday.
I think, I know roughly what you're talking about, but I don't think you've stated it very precisely.
Okay, well, I'll do my best. And that furthermore, that there could be a match by mistake. You recall that phrase that you used, a match by mistake?
Yes.
And the numbers that you referred to were 1 in 50 to 1 in 200. Do you recall that series of questions?
I do.
And that's the very point that the NRC addresses on page 88, the quote that I just read to you, about not combining laboratory error rate and chance of a match. Recall that?
Well, I recall you reading it. Yes.
And that's what was up on the screen yesterday.
That's what's up on the screen.
How many biological samples were tested in this case?
I really don't know the answer to that, but I would say in the range 50 to 100. But I'm just guessing, so I perhaps shouldn't even bother.
Objection, I would move to strike since you said he was guessing.
Well, jury can put that into appropriate context.
Well, let me give you a definition so we can go a little bit further with this question. Let's define a sample as any biological sample which undergoes the DNA testing process.
Yes?
Okay?
Mhm.
And let's assume, just for a hypothetical, since I don't want you to guess about how many, that there have been 200 samples analyzed in this case, according to the definition I just gave you. Okay?
Yes?
If those numbers that you threw out yesterday, 1 in 50 and 1 in 200, were real forensic casework laboratory error rate. Are you with me so far?
I am.
Then what that means is that the chances, or that if those estimates are correct, that 196 to 199 of the results that might have been presented if 200 samples were tested were in fact the correct answers, isn't that what it means?
Well, that's one way of interpreting it, yes. I'm not sure.
Is that a correct way to interpret?
Well, error rate is a rather vague term. I think one has to address the issue you're talking about, one has to split it up into false positives and false negatives and think in terms of the samples you're referring to, not just the number of samples, but during the testing process, the number of opportunities for making a false positive, the number of opportunities for making a false negative, and then assess the expected number of each of those kinds. That would be assuming you had an estimate of the rate. I don't think it's enough just to count samples.
Okay. Well, those are your numbers, 1 in 50 to 1 in 200.
I mentioned those as the sort of numbers one sees coming from blind external proficiency tests in related areas. For example, the bone marrow program, where they do conduct these sort of tests and they get results of that order.
Okay. So one correct way to interpret the numbers that you threw out yesterday, 1 in 50 to 1 in 200, if 200 samples were tested, as I've defined samples, would be that 196 to 199 of them were the correct answers. Isn't that true?
Well, in my last answer, I just said I think it's actually important in this context to split.
Objection, Your Honor, that's non-responsive.
So the answer is it's not true then.
It's not true.
It's not.
Yesterday you said that, at the end of that series of questions, that of the two, the coincidental match of 1 in billions and the match by mistake of 1 in 50 to 1 in 200, you said the match by mistake plays a more important role. Do you recall giving that answer at the very end of your direct examination?
I do.
And when you said that that plays a more important role, weren't you violating the very caution that the NRC prescribed in 1992 when they said coincidental identity and laboratory error are different phenomena? So the two cannot and should not be combined in a single estimate. However, both should be considered. Weren't you violating that?
I don't see how. I was making a statement about the relative magnitude of the components. I wasn't combining them, and I was considering both.
Professor Speed, you have not criticized any of the frequency estimates which have been presented to this jury in this case, have you?
Objection, argument beyond the scope.
Sustained beyond scope.
Professor Speed, have you criticized any of the frequency estimates which have been presented in this case?
How is that beyond the scope? It's the only thing
Professor
that we
Speed,
need to know.
You do not mean by any of your discussions about laboratory error and that the match by mistake plays a more important role, that if the jury decides that there was not a mistake made in any of the testing in this case, that the population frequencies are incorrect?
I haven't previously said that. But if you ask me, do I believe the population frequencies, the answer is no.
You have not criticized in your direct examination any of the population frequency estimates in this case, have you?
Objection beyond the scope of direct examination.
Sustained.
You have simply alerted the jury to consider the possibility of certain errors which may have occurred in this case. Isn't that true?
Objection, argumentative to the form of the question.
Oral.
I think the answer simply is inappropriate there. I spoke on one aspect. I have not approved or disapproved, at least I did not approve or disapprove of the frequencies in my direct examination. I didn't address them. So
Some of the possible errors that might have occurred in this case, you listed as the chance of a sample mix-up. Do you
yes,
remember that? You just generalized with errors in DNA testing. Do you recall that?
yes,
And then you described generally errors in all stages of handling. Do you recall that?
I do.
Now, you have relied on the evaluation and testimony of Dr. Gerdes in recognizing the possibility of sample handling cross-contamination in your case, haven't you?
Not solely. No. I also relied on that flowchart that we had up there, which I believe is a prosecution flowchart, which shows the possibility of errors before the samples are split and sent to the separate labs. And I'm just relying on my general experience that nobody can say with certainty no errors occurred in that initial phase.
You have not made any attempt to quantify the likelihood that any of those errors actually occurred in this case, have you?
That is not my role. That is the role of external blind proficiency tests. I'm simply pointing out their possibility, and in fact, I was saying there should be tests to quantify these error rates.
Professor Speed, I want to ask you. You yourself, are you saying you're not capable of quantifying the likelihood of errors having occurred in a case such as this, a complex case such as this?
Objection has been answered and the word complex.
I am not able to, on the basis of my knowledge at the moment in this specific context. I've said how I think they should. It's not possible to look at a single case and come up with error rates. They require, sorry to keep saying this, external blind proficiency tests.
And the weak part is your knowledge at the moment in deciding how to approach this problem, isn't it?
Well, weak in what sense?
It's deficient.
I'm not attempting to produce figures.
You have not attempted to produce
I have not
figures.
attempted to produce figures.
In fact, nothing you have said constitutes statistical evidence that any of those possible errors actually occurred. Isn't that true?
That is true.
If the jury decides that none of these possible errors actually occurred, then the only statistical information which they have to evaluate the match evidence in this case is the frequency estimates produced by Dr. Weir. Isn't that true?
Sustain.
Professor Speed, would you be willing to allow the jury to decide whether any of these possible errors actually
Sustain.
occurred?
Sustain.
Professor Speed, since you have not provided any statistical information about the possibility that any of these errors occurred, what information is left to this jury to decide the significance of the biological matches that have been presented in this case?
Objection, may we approach, Your Honor?
What I have spoken to is the way in which errors can be assessed with correct testing.
Objection, Your Honor, that's not responsive.
It is. Answer the question, Professor.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? Could we?
Are you sustaining the objection, Your Honor, or overruling him?
No, I'm directing him to answer the question.
Thank you.
Professor Speed, since you have not provided any statistical information about the possibility that any of these errors occurred, what information is left to this jury to decide the significance of the biological matches that have been presented in this case?
I thought I was starting to answer that, but I was speaking generally to the possibilities. I mentioned some figures that I know of in my experience as a statistician and in reading literature on error rates in similar biological contexts. I believe that's information that I've provided the jury. I don't understand why.
What about Dr. Weir's frequency estimates?
Excuse me, what about them?
Well, is that left for the jury to decide since you have not presented any statistical evidence of cross-contamination or any of these errors?
Objection, argumentative and beyond his expertise.
Argumentative, rephrase the question.
Do you mean that by the generalizations that you presented to this jury that the jury should not be free to consider the population frequency estimates that were presented by Dr. Weir?
I'm not telling the jury what they should or should not consider. I was not speaking about population genetics frequencies. I have made no statement to date, except a very brief one earlier in this cross-examination, about these issues.
All right, let's wind this up.
I'm trying to, Your Honor. If the jury decides that none of those possibilities...
Counsel, rephrase that. The jury gets to decide all issues of fact in this case. They understand that.
Since the jury gets to decide whether any possible errors occurred,
Now, let's start again.
since you have presented no statistical evidence that demonstrates the likelihood that any errors which might have occurred actually occurred, the only estimate, statistical estimate, which they have to evaluate the significance of the match evidence in this case is Professor Weir's population frequency estimate. Isn't that true?
I don't believe that's a correct description of my testimony. I believe, without actually giving numbers and saying these are error rates on the basis of certain sorts of tests. I have still given them statistical information.
Giving them estimates?
I have not given them numbers, but I believe my testimony has been informative.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Neufeld?
Professor Speed, do you believe that providing Dr. Weir's frequencies without providing error rates in this case is misleading?
That was my direct testimony.
Now, Mr. Harmon asked you a couple of questions about your position on assumptions. Do you recall that?
I do.
Okay. And about certain things being mainstream or not being mainstream. Do you remember that?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. Do you believe, sir, that your views on the necessity of relying on external blind proficiency tests to produce error rates for forensic DNA profiling is mainstream or minority position?
I think in this situation, I'm very much in the majority. I hardly know any other statistician who's knowledgeable about statistics and DNA profiling who doesn't think that.
One moment. Now, remember when Mr. Harmon put up a picture of the Bronco stains, item 303, 304, and 305? Turn it on again, please. I meant the flow chart.
Yeah.
Right. And he was pointing out to you that these stains did not have the same common point of origin as did the Bundy blood drops. Do you recall that?
I do.
Now, do you see, by the way, on this sheet where it states that the blood stains for 303, 304, and 305 were actually collected on August 26, 1994?
Yep, I see that.
Now, even though they may have no common mode of error with the Bundy drops, is it conceivable from a statistical standpoint that 303, 304, and 305 may have their own common mode of error?
Sustained. Sustained.
Well-
And we're referring to People's Exhibit 565.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Well, it has been asserted in this case, let me ask you a hypothetical. Assume that there has been testimony that these stains have been in the car, in the Bronco, for 2 months prior to their collection. And assume that during those 2 months, there were numerous unauthorized persons entering the Bronco or had access to the Bronco.
No foundation, cause for speculation.
Overruled.
If an error happened during that 2-month period, approximately 2-month period, is that the kind of error which you described earlier as a common mode of error?
Objection, call for speculation, no foundation, assumes facts not in evidence.
Overruled.
Now, it's stretching the definition somewhat, but it captures the essence, that it's something that is common to those samples before they received their separate analyses, which in this case I assume were consistent.
You mentioned that you haven't quantified the error rate for forensic DNA profiling. Is that correct?
That is correct.
But have you made suggestions to the appropriate bodies on how that error rate could possibly be quantified?
I have. I've written a letter to the National Research Council relating to the update or the second volume of this, and of course I've simply echoed with a little more detail the sentiments in the first one.
Finally, the prosecutor asked you whether or not you had called Dr. Weir before you testified today, and you said you hadn't. And you mentioned that you had been consulting or working with, using your expertise, your time, and your effort to assist the defense or to explain things to us since September of 1994. Did Dr. Weir, prior to his taking the witness stand here, call you to discuss his positions?
No, he didn't. I think we're both a little uncomfortable about being on opposite sides in this issue.
Nothing further, thank you.
Mr. Harmon?
Just a few, Your Honor. So you think Professor Weir misled this jury about not presenting error rates?
Objection to his impression of someone else's misleading.
Overruled.
That quote that you gave me earlier, I've disagreed with it.
Objection, that's not responsive.
Overruled.
You're asking me to say, did a colleague mislead a jury? And that sounds a rather strong sort of statement, but if I've got to answer yes or no, then the answer must be yes.
Didn't you just say that to Mr. Neufeld? Did you hear the question he asked you about that?
Objection, ask the answer.
Overruled.
Sorry.
Okay. Now, this is Mr. Neufeld. Okay? And I'd like to ask you if he asked you this question about 5 minutes ago. Okay? Professor Speed, Do you believe that providing Dr. Weir's frequencies without providing error rates in this case is misleading? Did you hear him ask you that?
I did.
And did you say, that was my direct testimony?
I did.
Did you mean that?
I did.
He was misleading.
All I can say is to say something is misleading is a more benign way than answering, yes, this person misled the jury, which is what you asked me.
Okay.
And I was understandably uncomfortable about having it phrased in that way.
Now, in fact, this jury heard the laboratory error rates for each of the laboratories that were presented from the laboratories themselves. Isn't that true?
Objection again to this jury, and objection to his misstating the testimony.
Overruled. Sit down.
When I use the term error rate, I mean...
Objection, it's not responsive, Your Honor.
No, he can answer the question. When the form of that question allows this type of answer. Go ahead and answer the question, Professor.
I don't believe that the figures presented by the three bodies, if indeed all three did, are error rates in the appropriate statistical sense, because they were not evaluated on the basis of external blind proficiency tests. So my answer to that question is no. They did not present error rates to the jury. They may have presented figures to the jury, but I would not dignify those figures with the description error rates in the sense that I'm sitting here talking about this term.
And in the 10 months that you've been retained on this case, you have made absolutely no effort to calculate an error rate that would meet your satisfaction. Isn't that true?
We've already covered that.
So you disagree with the form of the proficiency test results that they have presented to this jury, each of the laboratories?
The answer is yes. The design of the study that goes into an estimate is fundamental to the meaning of that estimate.
Now, let's go back to 303, 304, and 305, if you will. Okay. Now, you had never seen or been interested in any of the information that's on that exhibit until I showed it to you today. Isn't that true?
That's not exactly true. No.
What is the truth about those items?
The truth is a little vaguer. I have a sort of patchy knowledge of quite a lot of this evidence, but I do not feel comfortable sitting here claiming to have a detailed and accurate knowledge. But it's just not true to say I've never been interested. I actually have a lot of this stuff to just to sort of, as it were, general background, so I know the context in which I'm thinking about these issues.
Now you allowed, in response to Mr. Neufeld's questions, that there might be something in common with all three of those samples. Is that what you said?
I believe so.
But you have no idea what it is, do you?
No, I don't.
Do you remember what the results are in those three samples?
Well, I don't remember them, no.
So you have no idea whether the possibility of this common mode failure actually existed with those three samples. Isn't that true?
In general, yeah, the answer is no. But that's a general situation. Usually you don't know if errors occur unless it's in a test where the truth is known.
Now, one of Dr. Gertie's contentions was that in the sample handling for the evidence that was collected at Bundy, they were exposed, the samples from Bundy were exposed to the defendant's reference sample. Are you aware of that?
I'm
Objection to Dr. Gertie's intentions.
Sustain. Rephrase the question.
Contentions, Your Honor. I'm sorry.
Contentions.
Contentions.
Rephrase the question.
Sure.
But, counsel, aren't we going
I'm almost done, Your Honor.
a little broadly here?
It's within the scope. Yes, we are. One of Dr. Gertie's contentions is that the stains from Bundy had potential exposure to Mr. Simpson's reference sample during the sample handling. You were here for that, right?
That's right, and I am aware of that.
Do you have any idea or information in this general background information that you have whether or not the same statement could be made about 303, 304, 305?
No.
Not a whit of information.
At this, sitting here, no. I believe I have some notes, but that's not relevant. Huh?
Okay, and the same question with regard to being exposed to Nicole Brown's reference sample. Not an idea at all about whether or not those three samples were exposed to her reference sample during any of the processing.
That's true.
And the same question with regard to Mr. Goldman's sample. You do not have any idea whether or not those three samples had any exposure to Mr. Goldman's reference sample. Isn't that true?
That is true.
Okay, thanks.
Nope.
Mr. Harmon asked you whether or not your requirement that the error rates be based on external blind proficiency testing was an objection you had as to the form of the testing. Do you recall that?
Could you state that again?
Okay.
An objection?
Do you remember whether, I don't mean it in a legal sense, sir. I mean, do you remember when Mr. Harmon was asking you a few minutes ago whether or not your opinion that external blind proficiency testing is a necessity, is a precondition for presenting an appropriate error rate, whether he asked you was that simply, your opinion? Remember that?
I do remember that.
Okay. is that also something which has been strongly recommended by the National Research Council?
Certainly. It was in the quotes we read out.
Is both the necessity of external blind proficiency testing and error rates been strongly recommended by your colleagues in the statistics community?
Yes.
Thank you.
As to this witness? All right, thank you, counsel. Dr. Speed, thank you very much, sir. You are excused. All right, I think we need to discuss our next witness, correct?
Yes, I think
All right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you to step back into the jury room for a few moments. Jury has withdrawn from the courtroom. Two matters we need to take up. We need to take up the matter with the city attorney's office and the motion in limine regarding Dr. Mullis. And you indicated to counsel that you wanted Dean Ullman to be here for the internal affairs argument. I have not seen him appear.
My understanding, his plane was due here at 10:10, and we're expecting him any moment. I had Mr. Douglas to step out and check. Apparently he's not here yet, and if I may have just a second, I want to inquire about the motion limiting regarding Dr. Mullis. All right.
Because Mr. Yeoman is not here yet, Your Honor, perhaps we could take up the issue of Dr. Bowden's discovery?
Well, let's
Let's see where we are, Mr.
see where we are here.
Opposed to the court is we need, as I indicated, the court to utilize the time over the lunch hour to make some decisions regarding order of witnesses. And what I'd like to do now is to proceed with the argument regarding Dr. Baden and Mr. Kelberg and Mr. Shapiro. By that time, I'm hopeful that Dean Ullman will be here and we can have the city attorney here. And then I would ask the court to defer
All right.
as we speak. Good.
Let me ask Mrs. Robertson then to ask Mr. Walsh. All right, he's on his way over.
All right. We can proceed if the court wants to with the Dr. Baden motion.
All right, let's start
and then
with
we'll be
Bob.
ready with Dr. Ullman. Then I'll ask for recess at that point, Your Honor. That's the edit.
That's fine. All right, Mr. Shapiro, are you going to handle the matter regarding Dr. Bodden and Dr. Wolf? Yes, sir. All right. Mr. Kelberg.
Good morning, Your Honor, and thank you for giving me a moment or two of your time. I was provided, our office was provided late yesterday evening under an August 8, 1995 cover letter, various notes of Dr. Bodden, Dr. Wolf, Dr. Lee. And conspicuously absent from these notes is any note made by either Dr. Bodden or Dr. Wolf during the time of Dr. Lakshmanan's testimony. And if the court doesn't want to take my recollection, I'm sure we have videotape available, but my recollection is both Drs. Bodden and Wolf had yellow pads on which they were scribbling what appeared to me to be copious notes during the course of Dr. Lakshmanan's testimony, in particular his description of wounds and interpretation of wounds, et cetera, et cetera. This material has not been provided to us, and there is no basis on which it becomes privileged. If these are their notes, they are their notes. There is no work product privilege that applies if the witness is to be called, and in fact, in California, as the court is well aware, under Izzy-Zaga, the only work product privilege that applies is 2018C of the Code of Civil Procedure, the absolute work product, impressions of attorneys, etc. So that there is nothing in Izzy-Zaga that prevents or allows the defense to, in essence, hide those notes from us. And really, those are the crux. I'm assuming Dr. Bodden's going to come in here and talk about forensic pathology. If he wants to come in here and talk about stain analysis and DNA and so forth, where the notes that he has provided us may have some relevancy, we may be having an issue as to his expertise. But if he's coming in to talk about forensic pathology, there is almost nothing in his notes other than a litany of what he saw on June 22nd at the coroner's office, actually notes of Dr. Wolf, during the course of their examination. There's nothing, of course, regarding findings, interpretations, what have you. Clearly, under the Lyons case, 13 Cal 3rd 500, it's clear if he's going to be called, even if there were a work product privilege attached, it is waived by the concept of calling him. And as I said yesterday to the court, I learned to try cases when trial by ambush, when one-way discovery was the rule of the day. So I'm not going to stand here and tell this court I'm not ready to go. I'm ready to go. I could be ready to go in 30 seconds if they wanted to put him on next. But in fairness, if we're going to have reciprocal discovery, if we're going to try and avoid these ambushes, if the defense is not going to be able to hide his views from our evaluation in advance, then I must be down here and ask this court to impose the will of the people of reciprocal discovery, that they provide these materials to us. And again, I know of no legal basis, not attorney-client, because there's no confidential communication between the client and Dr. Bodden or Dr. Wolf. This is Dr. Bodden or Dr. Wolf taking notes during Dr. Lakshmanan's testimony. So it's all on work product, of which there is no work product privilege under Izzy-Zaga, and even if there were under Lyons, it is waived by their decision to call him. So I ask for those notes, any other notes that may exist, and I also ask to preview any boards or charts or diagrams that the defense intends to use during the course of Dr. Bodden and or Wolf's testimony.
Other than those that aren't already in evidence?
Correct, of course. Those are my requests, Your Honor.
All right. Mr. Shapiro.
Good morning, Your Honor, and thank you. Your Honor, I think Mr. Kelberg is well aware that on June the 14th of 1994, I retained the services of Dr. Badden, Dr. Wolf, and Dr. Lee as a consultant. And upon that retention, I notified the Los Angeles Police Department that, in my opinion, these were the leading experts in the country in their specific fields, and offered their services to both the coroner and to the crime lab at the Los Angeles Police Department to aid them in any way that could be of benefit in trying to focus on who the real killers were in this case. That request was turned down. Dr. Badden has been consulting with me on almost a daily basis since this case began, and is familiar with almost each and every aspect of the case, including evidence collection, including forensic pathology, obviously. He was the person who found the errors at the coroner's office that resulted in a report being generated of 16 mistakes and of the contusion to the brain that was missed by the coroner. He, like Dr. Lakshmanan, who in the most tedious testimony of this case, over 8 days, is not a person who makes copious notes of everything he does in an overall consultation. He is a conduit between the pathology, Mr. Simpson, and myself to educate me so I can hopefully present the points of view to the jury regarding the pathology in this case, the manner and cause of death, and the circumstances surrounding that death.
Okay. I have hit my drop dead limit. I've got to stop now. But we did get some OJ today, so that's good. And we will get more OJ tomorrow. Maybe somehow we'll figure out a way to make up the 2 days and a half. Well, not 2.5 that we've lost this week. All right, guys. I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much for coming out. Bye, guys.